Glossop in rural Derbyshire during the early 1900s. It was well known for its well-established wool industry and its close-knit and law-abiding community. But in 1923, some of the locals were shown in a more anarchic mob rule light due to some events that had happened previously with what later would become known as the Simmondley Pit Affair. One resident in the town at the time was married Albert Burrows. He was born in Cheadle Hulme in 1871, working in various labouring jobs, and gained a criminal record for horse theft, larceny, assault, and cruelty to animals. In 1914, Burrows, then aged 48, was living in a back-to-back house in Kershaw Street, Glossop, with his wife and daughter. During World War I, he obtained a well-paid job in a munitions factory at Nantwich in Cheshire, and while there met and became involved with 28-year-old Hannah Kaledine from nearby Nantwich, who was the mother of a 4-year-old daughter. This relationship led to a child being born in October 1918, who was also called Albert Burrows. On the 27th of May the following year, he bigamously married Kaledine after telling her he was a widower with a child who was being looked after by a housekeeper in Glossop. When he was employed at the munitions factory, Burrows sent money to both wives, but with the end of hostilities, jobs were hard to come by, so he was unable to keep up with the payments. Kaledine began to suspect that she was not legally married and wrote to Burrows' daughter in Glossop. His bigamous marriage was soon exposed, and he received a 6-month sentence in Walton Prison. On release, he returned to live with his legal wife and daughter. Kaledine took out a maintenance order against him, which he was unable to pay. As a result of the arrears building up, she obtained a committal order, and he received a 21-day sentence in Shrewsbury Prison. Coming out at the end of November, he had no money and no job, and either woman could enforce payment. If he failed, he would be sent back to prison. Burrows had kept in contact with Kaledine, writing to her several times, and when he left prison, he went to visit. In December, she told her parents in Nantwich that she was going to live with Burrows in Glossop, taking young Albert and the older illegitimate daughter, called Elsie Large, with her. Her parents tried to dissuade her, but she arrived on Burrows' doorstep, together with the children, on the night of the 19th of December 1919. Burrows took her in, despite his wife's obvious protests, saying that she could hardly be sent back. No doubt, after some stern words, his wife left the next day, and Kaledine stayed for 3 weeks. She immediately demanded the maintenance, which plunged him into a bigger financial mess than he was already in. His rent was in arrears, and he became desperate. He somehow seemed to have solved his problems by the time he appeared in court on the 12th of January 1920. He told the justices that Kaledine and the children had gone. At first, Mrs. Burrows, the genuine one, refused to return, but later she relented, her penitent husband having told her that Kaledine had obtained a good job in a provision shop in Manchester called Seymour Meads, and that the children were staying in a creche during the day. The day after Kaledine and her son were last seen, Burrows was spotted walking through the town early in the morning with Elsie Large, Kaledine's daughter. A couple of hours later, he returned alone. A neighbour who inquired as to the whereabouts of the child received the following reply. Yes, I was taking Elsie to her mother. Why? Where has she gone? Persisted the neighbour. I'm not telling anyone. We have agreed not to let anyone know. We are keeping it a secret. This conversation was not to be forgotten. With Kaledine allegedly working in Manchester, Burrows disposed of her few belongings, even selling her wedding ring. Things died down until 3 years later, on the 4th of March 1923, when there were headlines in the local newspaper which read, "Glossop mystery tragic disappearance of 4-year-old boy." This had happened because of the disappearance of a child, Tommy Wood, of 96 Back Kershaw Street, who lived round the corner from Burrows. Tommy had left home around 11 o'clock on the previous Sunday morning and had not been seen since. When he failed to return, his parents were not concerned because he usually went to his grandmother's for Sunday lunch. When he had not come home by tea time, his mother went round to the grandmother's, only to discover that he had not visited her that day. News of the disappearance soon roused the neighbourhood to action, and a search began with the aid of volunteers and the local police. A story that had been seen at about 5 p.m. in the company of 2 other boys on the moor led the police to suspect that he had fallen into the Turnley Brook, which was in full flood after some heavy rain over the previous days, and had been swept away. On the Tuesday, a bloodhound was employed in the search, and the dog followed a scent along the bank of the brook for some distance, only to stop and sniff the air. The brook was dragged, but all to no avail. Each of the following days, search parties with dogs scoured the area without any success. On Saturday, March the 10th, Burrows, who a witness had said had been with the boy on the day in question, had been interviewed by the police and gave a statement in writing to Inspector John Chadwick. This statement purported to show that the child had been seen by Burrows near the bottom of the road with 2 older boys. Burrows had asked Tommy to come home with him, but he had refused. The statement also mentioned a purse belonging to Tommy, which the boys had thrown into a hen enclosure, and a whip, which was described in detail. The police were sceptical, and Inspector Chadwick continued with his investigations. The purse had been recovered from the hen enclosure, and during the search of the Turnley Brook, a whip exactly like the one described by Burrows had been found. It had been tied to a stone to stop it being carried away, and the inspector was convinced that it had been planted. On the bank close by, the print of a rubber boot was found, and inquiries revealed that Burrows had borrowed a pair of waders from a neighbour. As a result of these inquiries and information supplied by witnesses, Burrows was again interviewed by police on Monday the 12th. A woman had seen a man and a small boy clambering over the shale heaps near Coal Pit House on Sunday the 4th of March, and a farm worker had seen and spoken to Burrows on the same day, and he had a little boy with him. The suspect volunteered a statement that he took the boy for a walk through the fields towards Simmondley, and while on Hargate Hill, he left the boy in a hollow while he went to catch a rabbit. When he returned, the boy was missing, so he returned to Glossop. This led the police to search a disused mine shaft from the now defunct Simmondley pit. This shaft was fenced off with a dilapidated wooden enclosure, so anyone could easily have crawled through and fallen into the gaping hole. A grappling iron was used in the search of the shaft, but the rope eventually broke and the iron dropped to the bottom. Work had to be suspended for the day. This shaft was over 100 feet deep and estimated to contain from 5 to 9 feet of water. There was a drainage outlet for the excess that went into some old workings, but there was insufficient flow to carry away a body far from the shaft. Inspector Chadwick, with all his experience dealing with criminals, noted that Burrows, while apparently helping the investigation, had consistently tried to point the police in the wrong direction. There was a deliberately planted whip. The story about the boy being seen later in the day, and his insistence that the boy could not have gone out to the moor. By a coincidence, while interviewing a man at Hargate Hill, the inspector had walked past the air shaft, which is on the opposite side of the road to the shaft previously searched. This shaft was surrounded with a stone wall, and he had seen that it had been disturbed on one side. On Tuesday the 13th of March, there was a dramatic development. That morning, the police left town to go to the search site. When they reached the area, they drove past the shaft searched the previous day and went instead to the air shaft on the other side of the road. Meanwhile, Chadwick had arranged for Burrows' movements to be watched and reported directly to him. While the police were searching this shaft, Burrows was walking up Simmondley Lane and got into conversation with some men who told him that the pit on the lower side of the road was being searched. When he heard this, he got worried and walked through the fields until he was in a position to watch the search from a secluded spot. From a platform of planks across the top of the shaft, a grappling iron was used. It eventually hooked onto something heavy. It was the body of a small boy, which was brought to the surface. It was identified as Tommy Wood, and the body was taken to the mortuary at the police station. The search had aroused a lot of interest, and a large crowd had gathered to watch. Chadwick knew that Burrows was watching from the moor above, and the police were instructed to go after and arrest him. An angry crowd of townsfolk set after him up the moor, and a desperate chase ensued, with Burrows being spotted from time to time as he headed across a hill. He had a good start as he ran, but he must have known he was done for when he saw crowds of reinforcements pouring up a track. In the end, Burrows was not initially caught by the police, but by the mob of townsfolk who had been out looking for the missing boy. He was spotted fleeing across moorland, and the police were alerted to what was going on and attempted to catch up. Burrows was finally caught, and this is where some of the people from Glossop and the surrounding area were not shown in the best light. Found cowering in a hollow under a bush, he was certainly roughly handled. If the mob had known how Tommy Wood had met his death, it is likely that Burrows would have been even more badly treated. As it was, when the police arrived, his captors were doing their best to hang him from an oak tree with a scarf tied around his neck. The police had a tremendous struggle to get Burrows out of their hands and escort him as far as the road. It was fortunate for Burrows that the police arrived when they did. He was taken back to the police station on the back of a commandeered open-backed lorry, still with a scarf round his neck. The whole route was lined with a mob, booing, hissing, and vowing vengeance. Burrows reacted by shaking his manacled hands and shouting. It is easy to imagine how the news of the discovery of Tommy Wood's body and the capture of Burrows would spread through the town. Housewives left their baking and ironing and ran to see the prisoner. The police, as well as Burrows, were subjected to a hail of stones. The number of people was so large that a path had to be forced through, with the crowd taunting the prisoner and him shouting back. On arriving at the police station, he was hustled inside and the doors firmly closed. Meanwhile, inside the station, Inspector Chadwick asked Burrows how Kaledine was getting on. He was taken aback by this seemingly casual question and began to reiterate all the lies he had told in the past, and to say that he had kept in constant contact with her. She would come by train and make her way to where young Albert would play with Tommy Woods. This unlikely story confirmed Chadwick's suspicions, and he decided to make inquiries into the whereabouts of Kaledine and her children. Shortly before 10 o'clock the following day, Burrows was brought to the magistrates' court in the town hall, in a car from the police station. A huge crowd had gathered, and at the sight of the prisoner they surged forward. As Burrows got out, handcuffed to two constables, attempts were made to attack him. When the doors to the courtroom were opened, the public swarmed inside, and all eyes were on Burrows, seated in the dock, flanked by the two police officers. The prosecution asked for the prisoner to be remanded in custody until the following Wednesday for the murder of Tommy Wood. The inquest on the boy's death started at around 10:45 in the same room, during which Burrows got up and said, "About that shaft higher up, where I took the police, where I saw the boy safe. The top shaft had no fence round it. There is a track between the top and bottom shaft, and water flows from one to the other. Anything falling down first goes to the second. I have a clear conscience." This was obviously an attempt to suggest that the boy had fallen accidentally into the upper shaft and had been carried away by the water. To avoid another scene after Burrows's remand, the police smuggled him out of the back of the building to avoid the crowd at the front. Later in the day, he was taken by train to Strangeways Prison in Manchester. On this journey to the station, he was booed all the way, and as the train pulled out, a crowd continued to shout threats and abuse. At the town hall the following week, the pathologist gave evidence that Tommy Wood had been sexually abused before being thrown into the air shaft. Few revelations could have done more to increase public anger. Burrows was sent for trial on a charge of murder. When this was announced, the public broke into wild cheering. By this stage, the news of the murder of Tommy had reached a wider audience, as sightseers were flooding to the town. The field around the air shaft became a mud bath, and visitors started to throw stones off the surrounding wall into the depths below, which created a problem for the police at a later date. Tommy's funeral took place on Sunday the 17th of March. The local school children would go and visit the grave from time to time. Everyone in the town knew about the tragedy. With Burrows due to appear at Derbyshire Assizes early in July, it was imperative to find out if Hannah Kaledine and her children were still alive. If not, then it was possible, just possible, that they were buried in the same site. Chadwick managed to locate Elizabeth, the sister of the missing woman. She supplied a wealth of information, including the fact that she had received cards from Burrows, but none from Kaledine, since she disappeared. Inquiries with Seymour Meads, the provision store, established that Hannah was not working for them and never had done. On one occasion in March 1920, her parents had come to Glossop to find out what had befallen their daughter, but Burrows told them that he had given her £3 to take the children on holiday in New Brighton on the Wirral, and escorted the couple back to the station. The stark facts were that on the 11th of January of the same year, Burrows took Hannah and her son for a day out on Simmondley Moor, but he had a cold-minded plan that would play out, as he then murdered the two of them and threw their bodies down an abandoned mine shaft. The following day, he disposed of Hannah's daughter in the same way. Having put the rumour around that Hannah and the kids had returned to Nantwich for good, he patched things up with his wife, and they returned to living together. Secretly, for the next 3 years, Burrows wrote to Hannah's mother, pretending that she was still alive. It was time to look further into the shaft, where Tommy Wood's body had been recovered. On the 7th of May, the police rigged up a tripod over the shaft, and for many days the police were engaged in bailing out the water by bucket, which was raised and lowered by a rope and winch. Progress was made, and the water lowered sufficiently for a start to be made on removing the stones, which had thoughtlessly been thrown down. Then the weather broke, and the rain was so heavy that it proved impossible to keep up with the inflow of water. To help improve the rate at which it could be withdrawn, a steam pump was installed next to the shaft to speed up the process. The weather improved, and things progressed, until some corrugated iron sheets were brought out on the 21st of May. Shortly afterwards, human remains were discovered among the debris at the bottom of the shaft and brought to the surface. By the 4th of June, sufficient had been recovered to assemble almost a complete adult female skeleton, plus that of a girl of 4 years, and the bones of an infant. Some of the other finds were a woman's boots and a child's clogs, with the foot bones protruding. The female's skull was identified as belonging to Hannah Kaledine because of an abnormality with one of her teeth. Items of clothing were recognised by Elizabeth Kaledine, and a Nantwich clog manufacturer was able to say that he was the maker. The trial of Burrows for the murder of 32-year-old Hannah Kaledine, her daughter, and 15-month-old son was held at Derbyshire Assizes on the 8th of July 1923 before Mr. Justice Shearman. The jury took a quarter of an hour to bring in a verdict of guilty. The judge put on the black cap and pronounced the death sentence. In view of this verdict, Burrows was not charged with the murder of Elsie Large or Thomas Wood. He was hanged at Nottingham Prison by Premier Executioner Thomas Pierpoint at 8 a.m. on the 8th of August. The remains of Hannah Kaledine and her children were buried at Glossop Cemetery, and the grave marked with a wooden cross. Today, there is no sign of the wall round the air shaft, just a few stakes and wire, while cows graze peacefully in the surrounding fields.